A racist woman calls 911 on a black man, accusing him of stealing his own car. But when the truth comes out, she's not just wrong, she's exposed. What he uncovers about her past will send chills down your spine. And the way this ends? You won't believe it. The sun hung high over the small suburban neighborhood, casting long shadows over pristine lawns and freshly paved driveways. On the corner of Willow Creek Drive, a sleek black Lexus sat in a driveway, gleaming under the afternoon light. The for sale sign, planted firmly in the grass, wavered slightly in the breeze. Jamal Carter wiped his brow as he stood next to the car, the key in his hand. He had just finished speaking with a potential buyer over the phone, arranging for a test drive later that afternoon. Selling his car wasn't something he wanted to do, but after his mother fell ill, he needed the extra cash to help with her medical bills. Family came first, always. Across the street, nestled behind a trimmed hedge, a pair of watchful eyes narrowed. Karen Whitmore, a woman in her mid-50s with short platinum blonde hair, gripped her phone with one hand and peered through her blinds with the other. She had never seen this man before, and something about him made her uneasy. Her lips pursed in disapproval as she watched Jamal move around the car. He was tall, well-built, and carried himself with a quiet confidence. But in Karen's mind, he didn't belong here. She was certain she had seen news reports about car thieves in the area, and in her opinion, he fit the description. Something had to be done. Her fingers flew over the screen as she dialed 911. "Yes, I'd like to report a suspicious man in my neighborhood," she said, her voice tinged with urgency. "He's lurking around a car that doesn't belong to him. I think he might be trying to steal it." As the dispatcher asked for details, Karen watched Jamal open the car door and slide into the driver's seat, checking the mileage and making sure everything was in order. Her pulse quickened. He was about to take off. "Hurry!" she pressed, glancing back at the car. "He's trying to leave. You need to get here now." Section 2. The Encounter. Jamal had just placed his hands on the steering wheel when the first siren pierced the air. His head snapped up, eyes widening as two police cruisers screeched to a halt in front of the driveway. Doors flew open. Officers leaped out, hands hovering over their holsters. "Step out of the vehicle! Hands where we can see them!" Jamal's heart pounded. His stomach clenched as a surge of adrenaline flooded his veins. He had seen enough stories to know how quickly these situations could escalate. Keeping his movements slow and deliberate, he lifted his hands and stepped out of the car. "What's going on, officers?" His voice was calm but firm. He knew better than to sound defensive. The lead officer, a stocky man with a rigid posture, narrowed his eyes. "We got a call about a suspicious person attempting to steal a vehicle." Jamal let out a sharp exhale, realization dawning on him. He turned his head slightly, catching movement across the street. Karen stood on her porch now, arms crossed, watching with a smug sense of satisfaction. His jaw tightened. He looked back at the officer. "This is my car. I'm selling it." The officer exchanged glances with his partner before asking, "Can you prove that?" Jamal forced himself to remain composed. "Yes," he said, reaching into his back pocket. "My registration and title are in my wallet. May I get them?" A tense moment passed before the officer gave him a curt nod. Slowly, Jamal retrieved his documents and handed them over. The officer examined them, flipping through the paperwork, before his expression shifted slightly. "Wait a second," the officer muttered. He looked up at Jamal, recognition flickering in his eyes. "You're Jamal Carter." Jamal arched a brow. "Yes." The officer's posture changed. "The same Jamal Carter from Carter and Associates, the law firm downtown?" Jamal nodded. "That's me." The officer hesitated. He turned to his partner, then back at Jamal. I think there's been a mistake." Jamal crossed his arms. "You don't say." Across the street, Karen's face paled. She had expected the police to arrest him, not recognize him. She had no idea what he was about to uncover about her past. Section 3. The Unraveling. Jamal could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. His pulse steadied, but a fire burned beneath his calm exterior. He had dealt with situations like this before. Misunderstandings fueled by bias, assumptions made before facts. The officer cleared his throat and handed the documents back. "Mr. Carter, I sincerely apologize. It seems there was a misunderstanding. Jamal let out a slow breath. A misunderstanding, he echoed, his gaze shifting briefly toward Karen, who was now fidgeting on her porch. Her arms had dropped to her sides, and her confidence had visibly shrunk. I understand you were just doing your job, Jamal said to the officers, his tone measured. But what about the person who made the call? He turned his gaze toward Karen. Shouldn't false reports be held accountable? The officers hesitated, exchanging glances. Well, technically she reported a concern, one of them said. It's not exactly a crime unless there's proof of malicious intent. Jamal smirked. Oh, there's plenty of proof. He pulled out his phone and tapped the screen a few times. See, I have a security camera facing the street. It recorded everything, including her watching me the entire time before calling 911. The officers looked at the footage, their expressions shifting. The lead officer nodded. We may need to have a conversation with her. Karen's face drained of color. I didn't mean any harm, she stammered. I was just being cautious. Jamal's expression remained unreadable. Cautious would have been walking over and asking if I needed help. Cautious isn't calling the police and lying. One officer sighed. We'll be filing a report on this incident, ma'am. You may be hearing from the authorities soon. Jamal tucked his phone away. He had a feeling this was just the beginning. Karen had skeletons in her closet, and he was about to open the door wide. Jamal could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. His pulse steadied, but a fire burned beneath his calm exterior. He had dealt with situations like this before. Misunderstandings fueled by bias. Assumptions made before facts. The officer cleared his throat and handed the documents back. Mr. Carter, I sincerely apologize. It seems there was a misunderstanding. Jamal let out a slow breath. A misunderstanding, he echoed, his gaze shifting briefly toward Karen, who was now fidgeting on her porch. Her arms had dropped to her sides, and her confidence had visibly shrunk. The second officer, a younger man with an uncomfortable expression, spoke up. Sir, we were responding to a call from a concerned resident. We have to take every report seriously. Jamal nodded, though his jaw remained tight. I understand that, officer. But do you take every report at face value? Or do you assess the situation before you pull up with sirens blaring, hands on your holsters? The lead officer looked away, embarrassed. We should have asked more questions first. Jamal inhaled deeply, exhaling through his nose. He turned toward Karen, his voice clear and unwavering. You called the police on me. Why? Karen's lips parted, but no words came out. She glanced toward the officers, as if expecting them to back her up, but there was no support to be found. I didn't know it was your car, she finally mumbled. You just assumed I was stealing it? Jamal finished for her, his tone sharp but controlled. She swallowed hard, color draining from her face. I thought I was helping. Jamal let out a bitter chuckle. Helping? His voice turned steel. You didn't see a car for sale, a man checking his own vehicle and think, maybe I should mind my business. Instead, you assumed the worst. And now? Now you're standing there, realizing just how wrong you were. One of the officers shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Carter, if you'd like, you can file a report about this false accusation. Jamal studied Karen, the fear in her eyes. He could take this further. Press charges for the distress, for the potential harm her actions could have caused. But something in him held back. No, he said finally. I won't press charges. Karen's shoulders sagged in relief. But before she could exhale completely, Jamal took a step closer. But I will make sure everyone in this neighborhood knows what happened today. I will make sure they know how quickly you jumped to conclusions. And I will ensure this conversation doesn't just disappear. Karen swallowed hard, shrinking further back. The officers exchanged glances before nodding. Understood. Again, we're sorry for the inconvenience. Mr. Carter. Jamal took his documents back, turning toward his car. As he opened the door, he shot one last look at Karen. Think before you act next time. And with that, he stepped into the car, leaving Karen to drown in the weight of her actions. But Jamal wasn't done yet. He had a feeling this wasn't the first time Karen had done something like this, and something told him it wouldn't be the last. Jamal drove off, but the fire in his chest refused to die down. This wasn't just about him. It was about a pattern, a mindset that had gone unchecked for too long. He couldn't shake the feeling that Karen's actions weren't an isolated incident. His hands gripped the wheel tighter as a thought surfaced. What if she's done this before? He pulled into a nearby coffee shop, parked, and took out his phone. A few quick searches led him to a local community forum. Scrolling through the posts, his stomach tightened. Another incident on Willow Creek. Police showed up, but it was a false alarm. Again. How many times is this going to happen? Karen's at it again. Called the cops on my teenage son while he was jogging. Said he looked suspicious. I've lived here for 12 years and have lost count of how many times that woman has caused a scene over nothing. Jamal's jaw clenched. This wasn't an isolated event. This was a pattern. Karen had been harassing innocent people for years, using 911 as her personal tool of control. His next move was clear. He clicked over to his law firm's email and began drafting a letter, a formal complaint to the neighborhood association, highlighting the multiple incidents, a request for a community meeting to address racial profiling, and a note to a journalist friend who loved exposing stories like this. Karen Whitmore had no idea what was coming, and this time, she wouldn't just be embarrassed, she would be exposed. By the time Jamal arrived home, his email had already been sent, and the wheels were in motion. He wasn't just going to let this go. Not this time. His phone buzzed. A reply from his journalist friend, Monica Tran. Monica, this is insane. I've heard murmurs about that woman before, but I didn't know it was this bad. I'm in. Let's talk tomorrow. Jamal allowed himself a small, satisfied nod. He had worked on enough civil rights cases to know that justice wasn't just about the law. It was about exposing the truth. But this was only the beginning. The next morning, he made a few more calls. First, to the neighborhood association's president, Lisa Bernard, a no-nonsense woman who had been trying to clean up Willow Creek's reputation for years. Jamal, I appreciate you bringing this to my attention, Lisa said, her voice tight with frustration. Karen has been a problem for a while, but no one's ever taken real action. If you have proof, I can make sure this is addressed at our next meeting. Jamal smirked. Oh, I have more than proof. I have receipts, screenshots, complaints, even a police contact who's tired of responding to her nonsense. Lisa exhaled sharply. Good. It's time the whole neighborhood hears about it. Jamal could hear the exhaustion in her voice. Karen wasn't just a thorn in his side. She had been a menace to the whole community. And now, it was time to shut her down. Later that evening, as Jamal was reviewing the final draft of his report, a notification popped up on his neighborhood forum. Someone had posted about the incident from the day before. That woman on Willow Creek called the cops again, this time on an innocent man selling his own car. When is enough? Enough. The comment section exploded. Wait, she did what? Karen needs to go. This is exactly why we need action. Someone make sure she's held accountable. Jamal smiled. The tide was turning. And Karen? She had no idea the storm that was about to hit. The next morning, Karen Whitmore awoke to something she hadn't expected. Silence. No friendly waves from her neighbors. No morning chat with the dog walkers who usually passed by her house. Instead, a chill hung in the air. When she stepped outside to grab her morning newspaper, a pair of neighbors, Mr. and Mrs. Patel, walked by with their golden retriever. Usually they smiled, exchanged pleasantries. Today, they barely glanced her way. Her stomach twisted. Back inside, she brewed her coffee, trying to shake off the unease. But then, her phone buzzed. A text from her friend, Donna. Donna, Karen, what's going on? I saw your name all over the community forum. People are saying you called the police on that lawyer guy for no reason. Karen's hands trembled as she tapped on the forum app. What she saw made her breath hitch. Thread title, Enough is Enough. Karen Whitmore's history of false 911 calls. Hundreds of comments. Hundreds. People recounting times she had mistaken neighbors for criminals, times she had accused delivery drivers of lurking, times she had made life a nightmare for anyone she deemed suspicious. And then, a post from Jamal Carter himself. Jamal Carter. I was the one Karen called 911 on yesterday. I was selling my own car in my own neighborhood. This isn't the first time she's done this, and I doubt it will be the last. But this time, we're not letting it slide. A sinking feeling settled in Karen's stomach. She kept scrolling. Local activists had picked up the story. Monica Tran's article was circulating. A petition had started, calling for her removal from the neighborhood association board. Her breath came quicker. This wasn't just gossip. This was a movement. Her front doorbell rang. She nearly dropped her phone. Peeking through the blinds, her stomach dropped further. Lisa Bernard, the president of the neighborhood association, stood there, arms crossed. And she wasn't alone. Behind her stood a small group of neighbors, their faces set with determination. Karen swallowed hard. She had spent years calling the police on others. Now the whole neighborhood had come knocking on her door. Karen hesitated, her fingers hovering over the door handle. Her heart pounded against her ribs, her mind racing through excuses, justifications, anything that might make this all go away. But as she peeked through the blinds again, she knew there was no escaping this. Taking a deep breath, she pulled the door open, forcing a tight smile. "Lisa," she greeted stiffly. "What's this about?" Lisa Bernard didn't return the smile. She stepped forward, the group of neighbors flanking her like a jury waiting to deliver a verdict. "Karen," Lisa said, her voice clipped. "I think you already know." Karen crossed her arms. "If this is about yesterday, I was just being cautious. I thought—" "No, Karen." Lisa cut her off, her expression unreadable. "This isn't just about yesterday. This is about every single time you've done this. Every time you've called the police on someone just because you felt uneasy. Every time you've disrupted someone's life because of your assumptions." Karen's mouth opened, but Lisa wasn't done. "Let me make this clear," she continued. "We are no longer tolerating this behavior. The entire neighborhood is fed up, and we're taking action." Karen scoffed, folding her arms tightly. "What do you mean, taking action?" "I have a right to call the police if I feel unsafe." Lisa's eyes narrowed. Feeling unsafe and making false accusations are two very different things. And thanks to Mr. Carter, we now have documentation of a pattern. We've spoken to the HOA board. There's a petition with over 200 signatures calling for your removal from the neighborhood association. And we've also reached out to legal advisors about potential harassment claims. Karen's face blanched. You can't do that." Lisa tilted her head slightly. "We already have." The murmurs of agreement from the neighbors behind her sent a chill through Karen's body. She looked at them, people she had known for years, people who had once exchanged pleasantries with her at the mailbox, now staring at her with contempt. Even Donna, her so-called friend, was standing off to the side, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Karen's hands clenched at her sides. "This is ridiculous," she spat. "You're all turning against me because I called the police on someone who looked suspicious." "No," Lisa said firmly. "We're holding you accountable because you've been using 911 as a weapon, and you almost ruined a man's life yesterday. What if the cops had escalated? What if something had happened to Jamal Carter because of your paranoia?" Karen's breath hitched. "I didn't mean—" "It doesn't matter what you meant," Lisa snapped. "It matters what you did, and what you've done repeatedly." Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Finally, Lisa took a deep breath and exhaled. "You have two choices, Karen," she said. "You can apologize, publicly, and step down from the HOA board voluntarily. Or," she let the word hang for a moment, "we move forward with a formal complaint to the city and pursue a harassment claim." Karen's throat tightened. "You're threatening me?" "No, Karen," Lisa said. "We're giving you a chance to make this right." Karen looked around, hoping for someone, anyone, to defend her. But there were only cold stares and expectant silence. For the first time she realized she wasn't in control anymore. Karen's throat was dry, her palms clammy. The weight of dozens of eyes bore down on her, pressing her into the very doorstep she had once stood on with confidence. For years she had been the one in control, the one making the calls, the one dictating the narrative. But now, the power had shifted, and she had never felt so exposed. Her gaze darted toward Donna, hoping for a lifeline. But even her closest friend kept her arms crossed, looking away as if embarrassed to be standing there at all. Karen swallowed hard. Her voice cracked, and she hated how weak she sounded. I never meant to hurt anyone. Lisa's expression remained firm. Then prove it. Karen looked around again, searching for any escape. But the truth was, there was none. The neighbors weren't going to forget. The HOA had already made up their minds. And Jamal Carter, he was a lawyer. He wasn't going to let this slide. Her choices were clear. Publicly own up to her actions, or watch as her life unraveled even further. With a deep, shaky breath, Karen exhaled. Fine, she muttered, barely audible. Lisa arched a brow. Excuse me? Karen lifted her chin, though her face burned with humiliation. I said fine. I'll step down. She forced the words out. I'll apologize. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Lisa nodded, satisfied, but there was no kindness in her eyes. Then we'll expect a statement at the next HOA meeting. Karen bit her tongue, her stomach twisting. This was a nightmare. Without another word, she turned, slamming the door behind her. But even inside, she could still hear them. Their whispers, their judgment, her downfall. 3 days later, the HOA meeting was packed. More people than Karen had ever seen in the small community center. And they were all here for her. She stood at the podium, hands gripping the sides like a lifeline. The microphone buzzed slightly as she cleared her throat. She hesitated. The words were sour in her mouth. I want to address what happened last week. Silence. Karen inhaled, forcing herself to continue. I made a mistake. I misjudged a situation, and in doing so, I caused unnecessary harm to Mr. Carter. I understand now that my actions were not only wrong, but dangerous. And for that, she gritted her teeth before forcing the final words out. I apologize. No one clapped. No one cheered. Jamal Carter sat in the front row, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. He didn't nod, didn't smile. He simply observed. Karen wanted to scream. She had done what they asked. Why did she still feel like she was losing? Lisa stepped up beside her. Thank you for your statement, Karen. As agreed, you will be stepping down from your role on the HOA board effective immediately. Karen's nails dug into the podium. She had no choice but to nod. The meeting continued, but Karen barely heard a word. The murmurs around her felt louder than the voices speaking. She had spent years making herself feel safe at the expense of others. Now, for the first time, she was the one who didn't belong. As the HOA meeting adjourned, Karen slipped out of the community center as quickly as she could, avoiding eye contact. She could feel the stares, the whispered conversations trailing behind her like ghosts of her own making. But Jamal wasn't done. He watched as she hurried toward her car, shoulders hunched, her usual confidence shattered. He could have let her go, let her fade into the background of her own humiliation. But this wasn't just about her. Jamal stood, adjusting his blazer before striding outside. Karen. She froze at the sound of his voice. Her grip on her car keys tightened, and for a moment, it seemed like she might pretend she hadn't heard him. But finally, she turned, her face pale and tight. Jamal approached, his expression unreadable. I hope you meant what you said back there. Karen swallowed. I did. Good, he said, nodding slowly. Because an apology isn't enough. It's just the beginning. Her brows furrowed. What do you mean? Jamal crossed his arms. You have a pattern, Karen, and you've been given more than enough warnings. If this happens again, if you ever put another black person, another neighbor, another anyone in danger because of your paranoia. His voice turned sharp, cutting through the night air. I will make sure you face real consequences. Not just a neighborhood petition, not just an HOA resignation. Karen's breath hitched. Are you threatening me? Jamal smirked. Number I'm promising you. She shrank under his gaze, and for the first time it seemed like she truly understood. Jamal let the silence stretch between them before he took a step back. Enjoy your evening, Karen. With that, he walked away, leaving her standing there, gripping her keys like a lifeline. The fallout didn't end there. Monica Tran's article had gone viral, sparking national conversation about racial profiling in suburban communities. News outlets picked up the story. Discussions brewed about legal consequences for people who abused emergency services for personal biases. As for Willow Creek, things changed. The HOA implemented new policies, ensuring that 911 calls were only made for actual emergencies. Police officers started pushing back on frivolous complaints. The community, once blind to Karen's actions, was now wide awake. And Karen? She kept her head down. No more neighborhood gossip. No more watchful eyes peering through blinds. No more calls to the police over suspicions. Because now, she knew, if she ever tried to use her fear as a weapon again, Jamal Carter would make sure it was the last time.